His hands were rough, from years of working the land, calloused fingers clutching a dented cooler with the last of his clean water. He never imagined that small act of kindness would save his family's farm. The news vans arrived without warning, cameras pointed at his weathered face as the nation watched. "Your story touched millions," she said, stepping out from behind the cameraman. "Remember me?" In that moment, he recognized the jogger who had stopped by his field, parched and desperate during the worst drought in county history. But what happened next would change the future of Riverdale Valley forever. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on James Harper's shoulders as he straightened his back, squinting at the endless rows of withered corn stretching across his family's farm. The stalks that should have stood tall and proud by now were struggling to reach his knees, their leaves curling from the relentless heat. A drought had gripped Riverdale Valley for the third consecutive summer, and with each passing day, James watched his livelihood shrivel before his eyes. At 43, James had the weathered appearance of a man a decade older. Deep lines carved into his sun-bronzed face told stories of early mornings, late nights, and endless worries. His family had farmed this land for 4 generations, but James feared he might be the last Harper to work these fields. The bank's latest letter, now crumpled in his back pocket, had made the situation painfully clear. 3 more months to catch up on mortgage payments, or everything would be lost. "Dad!" The voice of his 16-year-old daughter, Lucy, carried across the field. "Got the irrigation fixed on the east section." James nodded appreciatively. Lucy had her mother's determination and quick mind. Since Emma's passing from cancer 3 years ago, Lucy had stepped into roles no teenager should have to fill, becoming both student and farmhand, while James's 12-year-old son, Ben, had grown increasingly quiet, retreating into books and solitary baths. Walks along the creek bed. "Good work, sweetheart," James called back, wiping sweat from his brow with a faded bandana. "Take a break." "It's too hot to keep going." Lucy jogged toward him, her brown ponytail bouncing behind her. Despite everything, she managed to maintain an optimism that James both admired and worried about. Reality would catch up eventually. "The weather service says there might be rain next week," she said, reaching him. James grunted noncommittally. They'd heard that promise too many times over the past months. "We'll believe it when we see it. For now, let's focus on what we can control." Together, they walked toward the shade of an ancient oak that marked the boundary of their property. James's great-grandfather had planted it when he first purchased the land in 1923. And it had survived droughts, floods, and storms that had felled younger trees. James often found himself talking to it silently, as though the old oak held some ancestral wisdom that might save them all. Under its sprawling branches, they had set up a makeshift break area, a weathered picnic table, a cooler of water, and a battery-powered radio that mostly broadcast static-filled weather reports and agricultural updates. None of them promising. James reached into the cooler and handed Lucy a bottle of water, taking one for himself. The cool liquid was a momentary reprieve from the oppressive heat. "Ben still at Mrs. Wilson's?" James asked, referring to their elderly neighbor who paid Ben a small amount to help with household chores and garden work. The extra income was modest but necessary. Lucy nodded. "He'll be home by dinner. He said he's fixing her porch steps today." James felt a pang of both pride and sadness. His son shouldered responsibilities beyond his years, just like Lucy. The drought had stolen not just their livelihood, but pieces of their childhood too. "I was thinking," Lucy said tentatively, the way she always did when broaching a difficult subject. "Maybe we should consider Mr. Richardson's offer." James's jaw tightened. Frank Richardson, a local businessman turned developer, had been making increasingly persistent offers to buy a portion of the Harper land, the fertile section that bordered the main road. Perfect for the shopping center he envisioned, as Riverdale Valley grew from rural farming community to budding suburb. "We're not selling, Lucy. Not a single acre." James's tone left no room for discussion. "This land stays in the family." Lucy didn't argue, but the crease between her eyebrows told James she disagreed. She was practical, his daughter, sometimes too practical for a 16-year-old. "I've got some ideas for extra income," James said, softening his tone. "The farmer's market in Clayton might take some of our preserves and honey. And I'd been talking to Pete about helping with his landscaping business on weekends." Lucy brightened slightly. "I could make more jam from the blackberries by the creek. Mrs. Wilson says they're the best she's ever tasted." James smiled, grateful for her resilience. "That's my girl. We'll make it work. Harpers always do." But even as he spoke the words, doubt gnawed at him. The Harpers had indeed weathered many storms over generations, but this drought felt different, more persistent, more devastating. The climate had been changing, becoming more unpredictable, with extremes that the old farming almanacs never accounted for. Many of their neighbors had already sold their land, moving to cities or taking corporate jobs that offered stability the farming life no longer could. James finished his water and stood. "I'm going to check the western field. You head back to the house and start on dinner. I'll be up in an hour." Lucy hesitated. "Are you sure? I can come with you." "I'm sure," James said firmly. "You've done enough for today. Rest a bit." After Lucy reluctantly headed toward their modest farmhouse in the distance, James sank back onto the bench, allowing himself a rare moment of vulnerability now that he was alone. He pulled the bank letter from his pocket, reading it again as if the words might have changed since morning. They hadn't. The numbers stared back at him, implacable. $24, $658 in missed payments, plus interest, an impossible sum for a farm that was producing at less than 40% capacity. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it away, then picked up his empty water bottle and Lucy's, placing them in the small recycling bin they kept by the oak. Emma had always been insistent about recycling, a habit that James maintained partly out of respect for her memory, and partly because it was just the right thing to do. "Take care of the land, and it takes care of you," she used to say. But lately, the land seemed unable to hold up its end of the bargain. James was about to head toward the western field when movement along the road caught his eye. A figure was jogging along the dusty shoulder, moving at a steady pace despite the heat. As the person drew closer, James could make out a woman in her 30s, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, dressed in professional-looking running gear that seemed out of place in their rural setting. Most locals knew better than to exercise outdoors during the hottest part of the day. This woman was either new to the area or passing through Bass. Either way, she was taking a risk in this heat. As if confirming his concern, the jogger slowed, then stopped, bending slightly at the waist with her hands on her knees. Even from a distance, James could tell she was struggling. Without hesitation, he grabbed the cooler and walked toward the road. "Hey there," he called as he approached. "You all right?" The woman straightened, clearly startled by his voice. Up close, James could see she was indeed suffering from the heat. Her face flushed, her breathing labored. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice suggested otherwise. "Just hotter than I expected." "It sneaks up on you out here," James said, opening the cooler. "We're having a record-breaking summer. You should take some water." She eyed him cautiously, then glanced at the offered cooler. City instincts, James thought. Out here, neighbors helped neighbors, or strangers for that matter, but he knew that wasn't always the case in more populated areas. It's just water," he assured her. "You look like you could use it." After another moment's hesitation, she reached for a bottle. "Thank you. I'm sorry to impose." "No imposition at all." James gestured toward the shade of the oak. "You might want to rest a bit before continuing. Heat exhaustion is nothing to mess with." She seemed about to decline, then nodded, following him to the picnic table. As they walked, James noticed her taking in the farm with an observant eye, her gaze lingering on the struggling crops. "Droughts hit us hard," he explained, feeling a strange need to defend the sorry state of his fields. "Third year running." "I can see that," she said, her voice gentler now. "Are many farms in the area affected?" "All of them," James replied, sitting across from her at the table. "Some worse than others. Depends on your irrigation system, soil quality, what you're growing. But nobody's having an easy time." She took a long drink of water, then introduced herself. "I'm Rebecca Chen, by the way. James Harper." He gestured to the expanse around them. "Harper Family Farm. Though these days it's just me and my kids trying to keep it going." Rebecca's eyes showed genuine interest. "How long has your family been farming here?" "Since 1923. My great-grandfather started with 20 acres and a dream." James smiled ruefully. "We're up to 150 acres now, though half of that is barely producing." "That's a remarkable legacy," Rebecca said, and something in her tone made James believe she meant it. "Do you children want to continue farming?" The question hit close to home. "My daughter might. My son." James shook his head. "Ben's got a different path ahead, I think. He's got a mind for science and engineering. Builds these incredible contraptions in the barn when he thinks I'm not looking." Rebecca smiled. "Sounds like a bright kid." "They both are," James agreed. "Too bright for their own good sometimes." They fell into a comfortable silence as Rebecca continued to drink her water and cool down in the shade. James found himself wondering about her. She didn't have the look of someone from Riverdale Valley or any of the surrounding farming communities. Her running clothes were high-end, her manner educated and polished. "You're not from around here," he observed. Rebecca shook her head. "Just passing through. I'm taking a break from work. Thought a long run might clear my head." She gestured to her current state with a self-deprecating smile. "Clearly, I misjudged the conditions. City folk often do," James said, without malice. "Weather's a theory until you work in it every day." Rebecca laughed, a genuine sound that softened her professional demeanor. "That's a quote worth remembering." She finished her water and stood, suddenly seeming in a hurry to leave. "I should get going. Thank you for the water and the shade, Mr. Harper. It was kind of you to help a stranger." "James," he corrected. "And it's nothing. Anyone would do the same." Rebecca's expression suggested she didn't quite believe that, but she nodded. "Well, I appreciate it all the same." She hesitated, then asked, "Would it be all right if I took another bottle for the return trip? I promise I'll be more careful." "Of course." James handed her a second bottle from the cooler. "And maybe stick to the shaded side of the road. It's at least a few degrees cooler." "I will. Thank you again." Rebecca took the bottle and stepped back. "Good luck with your farm, James. I hope things turn around for you." With that, she turned and jogged away, this time at a more measured pace. James watched her go, struck by the brief, unexpected connection with someone from outside his usual world. It had been a long time since he got a conversation with anyone who wasn't a local farmer, supplier, or bank representative. It felt good, somehow, to be reminded that the world extended beyond the boundaries of his struggling land. As Rebecca disappeared down the road, James shook himself from his reverie and headed toward the western field. The brief interaction had been a pleasant distraction, but reality demanded his attention. He had crops to save, a family to provide for, and a legacy to preserve, all seemingly impossible tasks in the face of unrelenting drought and mounting debt. Little did he know that the simple act of offering water to a thirsty stranger was about to change everything. Rebecca Chen maintained her steady pace until she was well out of sight of the Harper farm, then slowed to a walk, her mind racing faster than her feet had been. She pulled out her phone not to check the time or her running stats, but to tap a quick voice memo. "James Harper, fourth-generation farmer, Harper Family Farm, Riverdale Valley," she spoke into the device. "Severe drought impact, likely financial pressure, single father of 2. Kids helping with farm operation, strong sense of legacy and land stewardship, refused to sell to developer despite obvious hardship." She paused, then added, "Perfect subject for the American Resilience series. Follow up immediately." Rebecca slipped the phone back into her pocket, her professional mask momentarily dropping to reveal a satisfied smile. As the senior investigative correspondent for the national morning show, she had developed a keen eye for compelling human interest stories, the kind that resonated with viewers across the country and often led to tangible change in people's lives. The American Resilience series had been her brainchild, her response to the increasing negativity in the daily news cycle. Each segment focused on ordinary Americans facing extraordinary challenges with grace and determination. The stories weren't just meant to inspire. They typically included a call to action, connecting viewers who wanted to help with people who needed it. Rebecca hadn't been entirely honest with James Harper. She wasn't passing through Riverdale Valley by accident. The agricultural crisis affecting America's heartland had been on her radar for months, and she'd come to this particular region specifically to find a face to put to the statistics, someone who embodied the struggle and the spirit of the American farmer. Her jogging reconnaissance was a technique she often employed to observe communities authentically, without the barriers that cameras and formal interviews created. James Harper, with his weathered honesty and quiet dignity, was exactly the kind of person she'd been looking for. His refusal to sell out despite obvious financial strain, his dedication to his children and their future, the historic connection to land that had sustained generations, it all made for a narrative that Americans would connect with emotionally. As she continued walking back toward the small inn where she was staying in Clayton, the nearest town to Riverdale Valley, Rebecca began mentally outlining the segment. She would need to conduct proper interviews, of course with James, his children, neighbors, perhaps local agricultural experts. She'd need footage of the farm, the drought-stricken fields, the family working together despite the odds stacked against them. But more importantly, she'd need to establish trust. Rebecca had learned, through years of experience, that the most powerful stories came when subjects forgot about the cameras and spoke from the heart. James Harper struck her as a proud man, someone unlikely to accept charity or to air his struggles publicly. She would need to approach carefully, to make him understand that sharing his story might not only help his family, but could shine a light on the plight of farmers everywhere. By the time Rebecca reached the inn, she had a clear plan. She would spend one more day gathering background information on Riverdale Valley, the agricultural situation in the region, and whatever public records she could find about Harper Family Farm. Then she would return no as a jogger this time, but as Rebecca Chen, national morning show correspondent, with a proposal that could potentially save James Harper's legacy. For now, though, she kept the second water bottle he'd given her, a tangible reminder of the simple generosity that had made such an impression. In her line of work, Rebecca had encountered people from all walks of life, but it was often those with the least to give who gave the most freely. James Harper, offering water from his limited supply to a stranger despite his own precarious situation, embodied that truth perfectly. Rebecca took a long drink from the bottle, its contents still cool despite the walk back to town. She had a feeling this story might become something special, the kind that could make a real difference, not just for one farming family in Riverdale Valley, but perhaps for struggling agricultural communities across the country. The following morning, James was up before dawn, as usual. He moved quietly through the darkened farmhouse, careful not to wake Lucy and Ben, as he prepared a simple breakfast of toast and coffee. The kitchen, with its warm countertops and outdated appliances, had been Emma's domain once. She'd filled it with warmth and laughter, fresh-baked bread and jam made from berries the children had picked. Now it felt hollow sometimes, despite James's best efforts to maintain some of the traditions she'd established. As he waited for his coffee to brew, James opened his laptop, an ancient machine that protested with whirring fans whenever asked to perform the simplest tasks. He checked the weather forecast first, though he'd learned to take the predictions with substantial skepticism. Today promised to be marginally cooler than yesterday, with a slight chance of precipitation in the evening. James had heard that particular forecast enough times to know not to get his hopes up. Next, he reluctantly opened his email, bracing himself for more bad news. There was the usual assortment of promotional messages from agricultural suppliers, a reminder about the upcoming county fair committee meeting, and James sat up straighter, an email from Pete Lawson about the weekend landscaping work. Pete was offering 40 hours over the next 2 weeks, which would bring in much-needed cash, even if it meant James would be working from sunup to well past sundown between the farm and the second job. "I'll take it," James muttered to himself, quickly typing a reply before he could overthink the impact of being away from the farm so much. Lucy could handle the daily operations with Ben's help, and they have Sunday afternoons together as a family. It wasn't ideal, but it was necessary. Just as he was about to close the laptop, a new email notification appeared. The sender was unfamiliar, rchen@nationalnews.com. The subject line read, Harper Family Farm Interview Request. James frowned, his finger hesitating over the touchpad. National News? It had to be spam, or some kind of scam. He clicked it anyway, curiosity overriding caution. The message loaded slowly, and when it finally appeared, James read it twice to make sure he wasn't misunderstanding. Dear Mr. Harper, I hope this email finds you well. My name is Rebecca Chen, and I am a senior correspondent with the National Morning Show. We are currently producing a series called American Resilience, focusing on individuals and families who are facing significant challenges with determination and courage. I believe I met you briefly yesterday when you kindly offered me water during my jog past your farm. Our conversation, though brief, left a strong impression on me. The dedication you showed to your family's legacy and your perseverance in the face of severe drought conditions exemplifies the kind of resilience our series aims to highlight. I would like to request an opportunity to interview you and your family for this segment. The story would focus on the challenges facing American farmers during these increasingly difficult climate conditions, using your family's experience as a personal window into a larger national issue. If you are amenable to this proposal, I would appreciate the chance to visit your farm at your convenience to discuss further details. My production team and I are flexible and would work around your schedule. Please feel free to contact me at this email address or at the phone number below with any questions. Sincerely, Rebecca Chen, Senior Investigative Correspondent, National Morning Show. James stared at the screen, realization dawning slowly. The Togortha woman he'd given water to had been a news reporter, and now she wanted to put his family and their struggles on national television? A complex mix of emotions washed over him: confusion, surprise, and an immediate, instinctive resistance to the idea of exposing his family's hardships to public scrutiny. Dad? Who are you emailing this early? James turned to find Lucy standing in the kitchen doorway, her hair tousled from sleep, but her eyes alert and curious. Nobody, he said quickly, closing the laptop. Just checking the weather and some work stuff with Pete. Lucy raised an eyebrow, clearly not believing him, but she didn't press. Instead, she moved to the cabinet, pulling out a bowl for cereal. Any chance of rain? Small chance tonight, James replied, grateful for the change of subject. But don't hold your breath. As Lucy prepared her breakfast, James's mind returned to the email. Should he even consider it? The Harper family had always been private people, handling their problems themselves, not broadcasting them to the world. And yet, what did they have to lose at this point? If nothing changed, they would lose the farm within months. Could this unexpected opportunity somehow make a difference? You look like you're solving world hunger over there, Lucy commented, sitting across from him with her cereal. What's really going on? James sighed. Lucy had always been perceptive, much like her mother. Keeping things from her was nearly impossible. Remember the jogger who passed by yesterday? The one I gave water to? Lucy nodded, spooning cereal into her mouth. Turns out she's a reporter for some national news program. She wants to interview us about the farm and the drought, put us on TV. Lucy's spoon clattered against the bowl. Seriously? That's amazing, Dad. Her enthusiasm took James by surprise. You think so? I'm not sure we want all our business out there for everyone to see. But Dad, this could help. Lucy leaned forward eagerly. Maybe people will understand what's happening to farms like ours. Maybe it could lead to, I don't know, something good. James had rarely seen his daughter this animated in recent months. The struggles of the farm had weighed on her young shoulders, dimming some of her natural brightness. Seeing a spark of hope in her eyes now gave him pause. I need to think about it, he said cautiously. It's not just about us. Whatever we say affects other farmers too, and I don't want to come across like we're looking for handouts. It's not a handout to tell your story, Lucy countered. It's just the truth. And maybe the truth needs to be heard. James was saved from responding by the appearance of Ben in the doorway. His hair even more disheveled than Lucy's had been, a book tucked under his arm. What truth? Ben asked sleepily, making his way to the refrigerator. Lucy turned to her brother excitedly. Dad got an email from a national news reporter who wants to interview us about the farm. Ben's response was more measured than his sister's. He glanced at James, then back at Lucy. Why would they care about us? It was a fair question, and one that James had been asking himself. Why would a national news program be interested in one struggling farm among thousands? What made their story special? She said something about a series on American resilience, James explained, recalling the email. Using our experience to talk about the bigger issues facing farmers. Ben considered this as he poured himself a glass of orange juice. You mean using us as symbols? Making us into some kind of, I don't know, poster family for rural hardship? The cynicism in his 12-year-old's voice both concerned and impressed James. Ben had always been observant and thoughtful, but the struggles of recent years had accelerated his maturity in ways that sometimes hurt James's heart to witness. I don't know what exactly they want, James admitted. I only just got the email. I haven't responded yet. You should at least talk to her, Lucy insisted. Find out more before deciding. Ben shrugged, but James could tell he wasn't as indifferent as he wanted to appear. Whatever you think is best, Dad. After breakfast, as Lucy and Ben headed out to start their morning chores, James reopened his laptop and stared at Rebecca Chen's email again. His finger hovered over the reply button for a long moment before he finally clicked it. His response was brief and non-committal. Ms. Chen, thank you for your email. I'm willing to hear more about what you have in mind, but I make no promises about participating in your program. The farm keeps us busy from sunup to sundown, but I could meet briefly tomorrow afternoon around 4 p.m., if that works for you. James Harper, he hit send before he could second-guess himself, then closed the laptop decisively. Whatever came of this unexpected contact, James had more immediate concerns. The irrigation system needed repairs in the south field, and he had to prepare for Pete's landscaping job that would start the following day. As he headed out to join his children in the day's work, James tried to push the email exchange from his mind. The fate of Harper Family Farm wouldn't be decided by a television program, no matter how national its audience. It would be determined the same way it always had, been by hard work, weather, and the increasingly capricious market for their crops. Still, something Lucy had said lingered in his thoughts. Maybe the truth needs to be heard. Perhaps there was value in sharing their story, if only to ensure that people understood what was happening to family farms across the country. Not for sympathy or charity, but for awareness. For understanding. By the time James reached the south field, where Lucy was already assessing the irrigation issue, he had almost convinced himself that meeting with Rebecca Chen was the right decision. Almost. Rebecca arrived at Harper Family Farm precisely at 4 p.m. the following day, parking her rented SUV in the graveled area beside the farmhouse. She'd deliberately chosen a vehicle that wouldn't seem out of place in rural surroundings, and she'd dressed down in jeans and a simple blouse, professional enough for a meeting, but not so polished as to create distance. She took a moment to observe the property before exiting the car. The farmhouse was modest, but well-maintained. Its white paint, weathered but clean. A covered porch wrapping around the front, with several rocking chairs suggesting a place where the family gathered in the evenings. A large barn stood about 50 yards away, its red paint more faded than the house's, with various pieces of farm equipment visible in its shadow. Beyond stretched the field's acres of struggling crops under the relentless sun. It was exactly what Rebecca had expected, and yet seeing it now, knowing she was about to propose putting this family's private struggles on national television, gave her a moment's pause. 20 years in journalism had taught her the power of storytelling to inform, to inspire, but also the potential to exploit. She'd built her career on finding the balance, on respecting the dignity of her subjects, while still delivering compelling narratives to her audience. The Harper story could be particularly powerful. She just needed to make sure it was told the right way. Rebecca stepped out of the car, gathering her notebook and a folder of information she'd compiled about the agricultural crisis in the region. She deliberately left her camera crew behind for this initial meeting. This was about establishing trust, not gathering footage. As she approached the house, the front door opened, and James Harper stepped onto the porch. He was dressed similarly to the day before, in work clothes bearing the evidence of a day spent in the fields, though he'd clearly made an effort to clean up for their meeting. "Ms. Chen," he greeted her, his tone cordial but reserved. "Please, call me Rebecca," she replied, extending her hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Mr. Harper." "James," he corrected, shaking her hand firmly. "Would you like to sit out here or go inside? It's cooled down some compared to yesterday." "Here is perfect," Rebecca said, genuinely preferring the porch with its view of the farm. "It's a beautiful property." A shadow crossed James's face at the compliment. "It's seen better days. Please, have a seat." They settled into adjacent rocking chairs, the wood creaking slightly as they adjusted. Rebecca noticed that James left the chair at the end empty, though it showed signs of regular use. A mother's chair, perhaps? She recalled he'd mentioned being a single father. "I appreciate your time," Rebecca began. "I know farmers don't operate on a 9-to-5 schedule." James nodded. "We fit things in where we can. My daughter's handling the evening irrigation check so I could meet with you." "She sounds very capable," Rebecca observed. "Too capable sometimes," James agreed, a hint of pride breaking through his reserve. "Both my kids have had to grow up fast these past few years." Rebecca recognized the opening. "That's partly what I wanted to talk to you about, how your family has adapted to the challenges you're facing. The drought, the economic pressures on family farms, the changing climate that's affecting agriculture across the bowl. Country." James's expression grew guarded again. "What exactly did you have in mind?" Rebecca leaned forward slightly, her voice earnest. "The American Resilience series focuses on people who embody the best of our national character during difficult times. It's not about creating spectacles of hardship or eliciting pity. It's about highlighting strength, adaptation, and values that persist despite challenges." She opened her folder, pulling out several printed articles and photographs. "Here are some of the previous segments we'd done." James took the materials, leafing through them slowly. Rebecca had chosen examples that she thought might resonate with Hema family that had rebuilt after a tornado destroyed their home. A small coastal fishing community, adapting to changing marine environments. A multi-generational business that had reinvented itself when the industry evolved. "These people agreed to have their struggles broadcast to millions?" James asked skeptically. Rebecca nodded. "They did, because they understood that their stories could make a difference not just for themselves, but for others in similar situations. Each segment includes resources for viewers who want to learn more or help with the morass. Larger issues involved." She watched as James continued studying the materials, his expression unreadable. After several minutes, he looked up. "And what would your segment about us involve?" Rebecca felt a small surge of hope at the question. He wasn't saying no outright. "We would spend about 3 days filming," she explained. "Interviews with you and your children, if they're comfortable participating. Footage of your daily work on the farm. Conversations about the history of the property, the challenges you're facing, and your hopes for the future. We'd also interview agricultural experts about the broader context the climate change is affecting farming, the economic pressures on family operations like yours." James seemed to be weighing her words carefully. "And the point would be what, exactly?" "To put a human face on issues that many Americans hear about only in abstract terms," Rebecca replied honestly. "Most people know that farmers are struggling, that climate change is affecting agriculture, that family farms are disappearing. But statistics don't create understanding or empathy, stories do." A hint of suspicion entered James's eyes. "And if that understanding and empathy leads people to want to help us specifically, is that the angle? The struggling farmer gets saved by the generosity of viewers?" Rebecca appreciated his directness. "That's not the primary goal, no. But I won't lie to you when these segments air. Viewers often respond, sometimes with donations, sometimes with business opportunities, sometimes just with messages of support. We don't solicit help directly, but we don't discourage it either." James stood abruptly, moving to the porch railing. He stared out at his fields, his back to Rebecca, shoulders tense. "We're not looking for charity," he said finally, his voice low but firm. "The Harpers have always made their own way." Rebecca remained seated, giving him space. "I understand that. And nothing about the segment would suggest otherwise. Your story is valuable because of your resilience and determination, not because you need rescuing." James turned back to face her. "And what about privacy? Once this airs, everyone would know our business." "We would only include what you're comfortable sharing," Rebecca assured him. "You would have input throughout the process. If there are topics you want to keep private, we respect that." James returned to his chair, his movements deliberate. "I need to discuss this with my kids. They have as much stake in this decision as I do." "Of course," Rebecca agreed quickly. "I wouldn't want it any other way." James glanced toward the driveway, where a school bus had just stopped. A lanky boy with dark hair stepped off, backpack slung over one shoulder, a book in his hand. "That's Ben, my son," James explained. "He's just getting back from his summer math program in Clayton." Rebecca watched as the boy approached, his curious gaze shifting between his father and the stranger on their porch. There was a watchfulness about him that seemed beyond his years, an assessment happening behind his intelligent eyes. "Ben, this is Ms. Chen," James said as the boy reached the porch steps. "She's a reporter with the National Morning Show." "Rebecca, please," she corrected gently, offering Ben a smile. "It's nice to meet you, Ben." The boy nodded politely, but said nothing, his eyes moving to the materials spread on the small table between the rocking chairs. "Ms. Chen wants to do a story about the farm," James explained. "About how we're handling the drought and everything. For national television." Ben's expression remained carefully neutral. "Why?" The directness of the question, delivered without pretense or social cushioning, made Rebecca smile. Children often cut straight to the heart of matters that adults approached circuitously. "Because I think your family's experience matters," she answered honestly. "Because what's happening to farms like yours is important, and most Americans don't really understand it. And because stories like yours might help change how people think about family farms, climate change, and food security." Ben considered this, then asked, "Would we have to talk on camera?" "Only if you want to," Rebecca assured him. "Nothing would be required of you that makes you uncomfortable." The boy looked at his father. "Is Lucy home yet?" "She's checking the Southfield irrigation," James replied. "She'll be back for dinner." Ben nodded, then turned back to Rebecca. "Can I look at these?" He gestured to the materials on the table. "Of course," Rebecca said, moving aside to get him better access. Ben picked up the articles carefully, his eyes scanning the text and images with an intensity that impressed Rebecca. This was no ordinary 12-year-old. "These people," Ben said after several minutes, tapping one of the photographs of a coastal fishing family, "did things get better for them after this aired?" The question caught Rebecca slightly off guard. It was perceptive, cutting past the storytelling to the practical outcomes. "Yes, actually," she replied. They received funding for a community-based sustainable fishing initiative that allowed several families to transition to new methods that work better with the changing ocean conditions. Ben nodded thoughtfully. "And they didn't feel exploited? Like their problems were entertainment?" James shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but Rebecca maintained her composure. The boy's questions were fair essential even. "That's something I take very seriously," she said. "We work closely with everyone featured in these segments to ensure they're portrayed accurately and with dignity. The goal is never entertainment through others' hardship, it's understanding and action." Ben seemed to accept this answer, at least provisionally. He handed the materials back to Rebecca and looked at his father. "I'm going to check on Lucy." After Ben had disappeared around the side of the house, James sighed. "He's always been the cautious one, thinks things through from every angle." "That's a valuable trait," Rebecca observed. "He asks good questions." James nodded, pride momentarily overriding his concern. "Gets that from his mother. She never took anything at face value either." The mention of Ben's mother created an opening that Rebecca was careful not to push too hard. "Your wife?" she asked simply. James's expression softened with sadness. "Emma. She passed 3 years ago. Cancer. I'm sorry," Rebecca said, and meant it. In her line of work, she'd learned to recognize genuine grief, to differentiate between wounds that were healing and those that remained raw. James Harper's loss was still palpable. "It's been hard on the kids," James said after a moment. "Especially with the farm struggling. Emma always knew how to make even the tough times seem manageable." Rebecca nodded, understanding now why the empty rocking chair held such significance. "She sounds like an exceptional person." She was. James straightened, visibly pulling himself back from memories. "But to get back to your proposal, I need to talk it over with Lucy and Ben. This affects all of us." "Absolutely," Rebecca agreed. "Take whatever time you need. And if you have more questions, or if Lucy and Ben want to talk to me directly, I'm staying at the Riverdale Inn through the end of the week." She reached into her bag and pulled out a business card, handing it to James. "All my contact information is here. And regardless of what you decide about the segment, I want to thank you again for the water yesterday. It was a simple kindness that meant a lot." James accepted the card with a slight smile. Anyone would have done the same. "Not everyone," Rebecca countered gently. "That's what makes stories like yours worth telling." As Rebecca drove away from Harper Family Farm 30 minutes later, she felt cautiously optimistic. James hadn't said yes, but he hadn't said no either. More importantly, she'd sensed that beneath his understandable wariness was a recognition of the potential value in sharing their story. The sun was beginning to set as she headed back toward Clayton, casting long shadows across the parched landscape. Fields stretched out on either side of the rural road, some green with irrigated crops, others brown and withered where water had been insufficient or resources too limited to maintain proper irrigation. Rebecca had grown up in suburban Chicago, far removed from agricultural life, but her years as a journalist had taken her to every corner of America, including many farming communities. She'd witnessed firsthand the slow erosion of rural economies, the consolidation of family farms into massive corporate operations, the increasing challenges posed by changing climate patterns. The Harper family's situation was not unique. That was part of why their story mattered. They represented thousands of families facing similar struggles across the country, families caught between generations of tradition and a rapidly changing world that made maintaining that tradition increasingly difficult. Whether or not James agreed to the segment, Rebecca had a feeling that their brief encounter by the side of a dusty road in Riverdale Valley would stay with her for a long time. It had been more than a human interest story opportunity. It had been a moment of genuine connection, a reminder of why she'd become a journalist in the first place, to bring attention to the quiet courage of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. As Clayton came into view, Rebecca made a mental note to follow up with several agricultural experts she'd contacted earlier in the week. If the Harper family agreed to participate, she wanted to be ready to move quickly, to capture their story while the drought was still evident in their fields and before harvest time arrived. And if they declined, she would respect their decision, even as she continued her search for another farming family willing to share their experience with the world. Either way, Rebecca knew the story of America's struggling family farms needed to be told. The question was whether James Harper and his children would be the ones to tell it. The dinner table at the Harper farmhouse that evening was unusually quiet. Lucy, normally the most talkative of the three, seemed lost in thought as she pushed her green beans around her plate. Ben methodically worked his way through his meal, his expression unreadable. James watched them both, waiting for one of them to break the silence about the topic he knew was on all their minds. Finally, Lucy looked up. "So, are we going to do it, the TV thing?" James set down his fork. "I wanted to hear what you two think before deciding anything." Lucy's response was immediate. "I think we should. It could help, Dad. Not just us, but maybe other farms too." Ben was more measured. "What exactly would we have to do? Just talk about the farm and the drought?" "Basically," James confirmed. "Ms. Chen Rebecca said they'd film for about 3 days. Interviews, our daily work, the history of the place. She said we'd have input on what's included. And what would happen after it airs?" Ben pressed, echoing the question he'd asked Rebecca earlier. "What's the goal?" James considered how to frame the answer. "She said it's about creating understanding, putting a human face on the issues facing family farms. But people might want to help us, right? Lucy interjected eagerly. She mentioned that too, didn't she? She did, James acknowledged carefully. But I made it clear, we're not looking for handouts. Lucy rolled her eyes with the particular exasperation only teenagers could perfect. It's not a handout if people choose to help because they care about what's happening to farms like ours. It's community. A pretty extended definition of community, Ben muttered. Random people watching TV across the country. Why does it matter how far away they are? Lucy challenged. Caring is caring. James raised a hand to forestall the brewing argument. The point is, this would put our lives-hour struggles on display for millions of people. That's not a small thing to consider. It's not like we have anything to hide, Lucy countered. And sometimes pride costs too much, Dad. The statement hung in the air, its implication clear. James felt a flicker of defensiveness, but it was quickly tempered by the recognition that his daughter had a point. How many times had he refused help that might have eased their burden, simply because accepting it felt like admitting failure? How much of their current predicament might have been mitigated if he'd been more willing to reach out when problems first arose? I'm not against it, Ben said quietly, surprising both James and Lucy. I just think we should be clear about what we want from it. If it's about bringing attention to what's happening to family farms, that makes sense. If it's about hoping for donations to save our specific farm, he shrugged. That seems like a long shot, and maybe not the best reason to put ourselves out there. James studied his son with a mixture of pride and sadness. When had Ben developed such mature perspective? And at what cost to his childhood? What if it's both? Lucy suggested. What if we want to highlight the bigger issues and also hope it might lead to something that helps us specifically? Is that wrong? No, James said after a thoughtful pause. I don't think that's wrong. I think it's honest. The three of them fell silent again, the only sounds the clink of forks against plates and the distant hum of the refrigerator, an old model that consumed too much electricity, but that James hadn't been able to afford to replace. Mom would have said to do it, Lucy said finally, her voice softer now. She always said people need to understand where their food comes from, what it takes to grow it. James felt his throat tighten at the invocation of Emma's perspective. Lucy was right. Emma had been passionate about agricultural education, even teaching local school children who visited the farm on field trips. She would have seen value in sharing their story, in making the invisible work of farming visible to those who benefited from it without understanding its challenges. She would have been more articulate on camera than I'll be, James said with a sad smile. You'll be fine, Dad, Lucy assured him. Just talk like you do to us, or to the neighbors, straight and true. Ben nodded in agreement. People respond to authenticity. That's what Ms. Chen is looking for, I think, not some polished performance. James looked between his two children, marveling at their insights. They'd been through so much, lost so much, and yet here they were, offering wisdom beyond their years. So, we're agreed? He asked. We'll do the segment? Lucy nodded enthusiastically. Ben gave a more reserved nod, but there was resolve in his eyes. All right then, James said, reaching for his phone. I'll call Ms. Chen and let her know. As he dialed the number from the business card Rebecca had left, James felt a curious mixture of anxiety and relief. Whatever came of this decision, good, bad, or indifferent, they had made it together as a family. There was comfort in that solidarity, a reminder that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced all others, side by side, drawing strength from one another. Rebecca answered on the third ring. This is Rebecca Chen. Ms. Chen Rebecca, James corrected himself. It's James Harper. We've talked it over as a family, and we're willing to participate in your segment. There was a moment of pleased surprise in Rebecca's voice when she responded. That's wonderful news, James. I truly believe this story is important, and I promise we'll handle it with the care and respect it deserves. That's what we're counting on, James replied. When would you want to start? Is this weekend too soon? Say, Saturday morning? Rebecca suggested. That would give us 3 full days of filming before I need to return to New York. James glanced at Lucy and Ben, who were listening intently. They both nodded. Saturday works, he confirmed. We'll be ready. After ending the call, James sat back in his chair, trying to process the commitment they'd just made. In 3 days, a television crew would arrive at their farm, pointing cameras at their daily lives, asking questions about their struggles, their hopes, their fears. It was an unsettling prospect, but also, perhaps, an opportunity not just to possibly improve their own situation, but to speak for the countless other farming families facing similar challenges across the prostate country. We should clean the house, Lucy said practically, already making mental lists of preparations. And maybe fix that loose board on the porch. And decide which fields to show them, Ben added. The ones with the new irrigation system look better than the others. James watched his children plan, their energy and focus reminding him once again of their mother. Emma had approached every challenge with the same practical determination, breaking down intimidating tasks into manageable steps. One thing at a time, he advised them, echoing Emma's favorite saying. We've got a few days to prepare. For tonight, let's just finish dinner and get some rest. Tomorrow will be soon enough to start getting ready. But even as he spoke the reasonable words, James knew they would all lie awake that night, minds racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. Their quiet, private struggle was about to become very public indeed. Whether that would prove to be their salvation or simply another challenge to overcome remained to be seen. Saturday morning arrived with a rare cloudy sky, providing momentary relief from the relentless heat that had defined the summer. James was up before dawn, as usual, but today his routine was altered by the knowledge that strangers would soon be observing it. He found himself straightening items that had been in the same slightly askew positions for months, brushing non-existent dust from surfaces, and generally moving through the farmhouse with an awareness he hadn't felt in years. Lucy and Ben joined him earlier than usual, both clearly feeling the same anticipatory energy. Lucy had put on one of her nicer t-shirts, still practical for farm work, but without the stains and minor tears that characterized most of her daily wear. Ben's hair was neatly combed, a rarity on weekend mornings when he typically moved straight from bed to books without concern for his appearance. Remember, James told them as they ate breakfast, just be yourselves. We're not putting on a show here. We're just letting them see how we really live and work. Right, Lucy agreed, though she continued to fuss with her ponytail. Totally natural. Ben smirked slightly at his sister's nervousness but said nothing, returning his attention to the book propped against the orange juice carton beside his plate. By 6 a.m., the family had completed their morning chores, feeding the few animals they kept, checking irrigation systems, and assessing which fields needed the most attention that day. They were sitting on the porch, sipping second cups of coffee and tea, when a small convoy of vehicles turned into their driveway, precisely at 8 a.m. Rebecca Chen emerged from the lead car, dressed in casual but professional attire, suitable for a day on a farm. Behind her came 2 more vehicles containing what appeared to be at least 5 additional people, and a considerable amount of equipment. Bigger operation than I expected, James muttered, standing to greet their visitors. Rebecca approached with a warm smile, extending her hand. Good morning, James. Thank you again for agreeing to this. I'd like you to meet my team. She introduced the key members, Michael, the director Sophia, the producer Taylor, the primary camera operator Chris, the sound technician and Davi, the lighting specialist. Each greeted the Harper family with professional courtesy that did little to ease the sudden tension James felt at the reality of what they'd committed to. We'll try to be as unobtrusive as possible, Rebecca assured them, seeming to sense his discomfort. The goal is to capture your authentic daily life, not to disrupt it. James nodded, not entirely convinced that was possible with the array of equipment now being unloaded from the vehicles. Cameras, microphones, lights, and various other technical devices whose purposes he couldn't begin to guess. We usually start with a quick tour, Rebecca explained, to get a sense of the property and identify the best locations for interviews and B-roll footage. Would that work for you? Sure, James agreed, glancing grants at Lucy and Ben. Kids, Why don't you show them around while I finish up a couple things in the barn? It was a transparent attempt to buy himself a few minutes of adjustment time, but Rebecca graciously accepted the suggestion. That would be wonderful. Lucy, Ben, would you mind leading the way? As his children led the news team toward the fields, James retreated to the barn, needing a moment alone to center himself. The weathered structure had always been his sanctuary, a place where he could work with his hands, fix what was broken, and temporarily forget the larger problems that couldn't be solved with tools and determination. He busied himself organizing tools that were already neatly arranged, aware that he was stalling but unable to help himself. The reality of cameras documenting their lives, their struggles, was more intimidating now that it was actually happening. Mr. Harper? A voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned to find Taylor, the camera operator, standing in the barn doorway. Rebecca sent me to check if you're ready to join the tour. We're getting some great establishing shots of the property. James nodded, setting down the wrench he'd been needlessly adjusting. I'll be right there. As he followed Taylor back outside, James made a decision. He would approach this, as he did everything else in life, straightforwardly, honestly, one step at a time. They had agreed to tell their story, and that's what they would do, cameras or no cameras. The remainder of the morning passed in a blur of activity. The news team filmed James and the children performing their normal farm tasks, checking irrigation systems, assessing crops, making minor repairs to equipment. Rebecca occasionally asked questions, drawing out explanations of farming techniques, the effects of the drought, and the history of the property. By midday, James was surprised to find himself relatively comfortable with the process. The team was professional and respectful, doing their best to capture authentic moments without staging or interfering. Lucy had quickly lost her self-consciousness, speaking passionately about the farm and its challenges when prompted. Even Ben, typically reticent with strangers, had opened up when Rebecca asked about the book of engineering designs she'd spotted in his back pocket. After a lunch break during which the news team tactfully withdrew to give the family some privacy, Rebecca approached James with a proposal for the afternoon. We'd like to do some of the formal interviews now, she explained. Individual conversations with each of you, talking more deeply about your experiences. We've set up in the living room, if that's comfortable for you. James hesitated. The morning's filming had been manageable because it had focused on actions, the physical work they knew so well. Interviews would be different, more personal, more revealing. What kind of questions will you be asking? He inquired cautiously. Rebecca pulled out a small notebook. I'll start with the history of the farm, your family's connection to it, then move into the challenges you're currently facing, the drought, economic pressures, that sort of thing. I'd also like to talk about what the farm means to you, your hopes for its future. She paused, her expression softening slightly. And, if you're comfortable, I'd like to ask about Emma, how her loss has affected the family and the operation of the farm. James felt his chest tighten at the mention of his wife's name. They rarely spoke about Emma with outsiders, their grief a private thing shared only within the family. Seeing his reaction, Rebecca added gently, only what you're willing to share, James, nothing more. After a moment's consideration, James nodded. All right, but I'd like to go first. Let me see how it goes before the kids do their interviews. Of course, Rebecca agreed readily. Shall we start in about 15 minutes? James nodded again, then went to find Lucy and Ben, who were showing Sophia some of the antique farming implements that had been in the family for generations. He pulled them aside briefly to explain the interview plan and his request to go first. You don't have to talk about Mom if you don't want to, he assured them. That's entirely up to each of you. Lucy's eyes welled slightly. I want to. People should know how important she was to this place, how much she loved it. Ben was more reserved. I'll see. Depends on the questions. James squeezed their shoulders supportively. Whatever feels right to you. Just be honest, that's all we promise to do. 15 minutes later, James found himself seated in his own living room, which had been transformed by the news team. Lights had been strategically placed to eliminate shadows, furniture rearranged to create a more intimate setting, and a complex array of recording equipment positioned just out of frame. Rebecca sat across from him, microphone clipped to her blouse, her expression calm and focused. "Just try to forget about the cameras," she advised, as the crew made final adjustments. "Think of this as a continuation of our conversation from earlier this week." James doubted that was possible with the bright lights and multiple people watching, but he appreciated the sentiment. He took a deep breath as Taylor counted down from 3. "James," Rebecca began once the cameras were rolling, "tell me about Harper Family Farm. How long has it been in your family?" It was an easy question to start with, and James found himself relaxing slightly as he recounted the farm's history, his great-grandfather's purchase of the original 20 acres. The gradual expansion over generations, the transitions from one type of farming to another as markets and conditions changed. Rebecca nodded encouragingly, following up with questions that guided the conversation naturally from history to present challenges. "When did you first notice the drought becoming a serious threat to the farm's viability?" she asked. James considered the question. "We've always had dry years, of course. That's part of farming. But this extended drought 3 years now, that's something different. The first year, we thought it was just a bad season. The second year, we started making more significant adjustments, changing crop selections, investing in better irrigation. By this third year," he shook his head, "it's become a fight for survival." "Can you talk about some of the specific challenges the drought has created?" James leaned forward slightly, warming to the topic. "Water is life for a farm. When there's not enough, everything suffers. We've had to let portions of our land go unplanted because we simply can't irrigate it all. Crop yields are down dramatically, even in the areas we can water properly. The soil gets harder, less receptive to what moisture does come. It's a compounding problem. Each dry season makes the next one worse." End quote. "And financially?" Rebecca prompted gently. James hesitated, then decided on honesty. "It's been devastating. Input costs, seeds, fertilizer, equipment, those don't decrease just because your output does. We're operating at a loss. Have been for the past 2 seasons. We've taken out loans, extended credit as far as it will go. At this point," he glanced away from Rebecca, toward the window that framed a view of the struggling fields. "At this point, we're facing the very real possibility of losing the farm if something doesn't change soon." Rebecca allowed a moment of silence to honor the weight of this admission before continuing. "What would the loss of this farm mean to you and your family?" The question hit James harder than he'd expected. He found himself struggling to maintain composure as he considered its implications. "It's not just land and buildings," he said finally, his voice rougher than before. "It's our history, our identity. 4 generations of Harpers have worked this soil, survived here, raised families here. My children were born in this house. My wife." He paused, steadying himself. "My wife Emma is buried on that hill behind the oak tree. This place it's everything." Rebecca nodded, allowing him time to collect himself. "Tell me about Emma," she said softly when he seemed ready. James hadn't expected to speak about Emma so openly, but somehow, in the moment, it felt right to share her story. "Emma was the heart of this place," he began, a sad smile forming. "She grew up on a farm about 30 miles from here. Understood this life completely, the joys and the hardships. We met at an agricultural conference in Clayton when we were both just 20. Married a year later." Memories flooded back as he spoke. Emma, laughing in the kitchen, teaching a young Lucy how to make preserves. Emma stubbornly fixing a tractor engine when the mechanic couldn't come for days. Emma standing on this very porch in the evenings, watching the sunset with quiet appreciation for a beauty that never faded even when times were hard. "When she got sick," James continued, the words coming more difficult now, "she made me promise 2 things, to keep the kids connected to the land, and to never give up on the farm unless I'd tried everything possible to save it. I'm still trying to keep both those promises." Rebecca's own eyes had grown misty. "It sounds like she was an extraordinary person." "She was," James agreed simply. "The kind who made everyone around her better just by being herself." The interview continued for another 30 minutes, covering topics from the technological challenges of modern farming to the broader economic issues affecting rural communities. Throughout, James found himself speaking with increasing candor, the cameras becoming less intrusive as he focused on the substance of what he wanted to convey. When Rebecca finally signaled the end of the interview, James was surprised to feel a sense of relief. Not that it was over, but that he had managed to articulate thoughts and feelings he rarely expressed aloud. "Thank you, James," Rebecca said warmly as the camera stopped rolling. "That was incredibly powerful." James nodded, suddenly self-conscious again now that the formal interview had concluded. "I hope it helps people understand what's happening out here. Not just to us, but to family farms everywhere." "I believe it will," Rebecca assured him. "Would it be all right if we speak with Lucy next?" "Let me check with her," James replied, rising from his chair. He found Lucy on the porch, anxiously awaiting her turn. "You sure you're up for this, sweetheart?" Lucy nodded determinedly. "Positive. How was it?" James considered the question. "Harder than I expected in some ways, but also good, somehow. Like finally giving voice to things I've been carrying alone." Lucy hugged him quickly. "You were never alone, Dad. We're in this together, remember?" The simple statement, delivered with such conviction, nearly undid James completely. "I remember," he managed. "They're ready for you now. Just be yourself." As Lucy entered the house for her interview, James decided to check on Ben, who had retreated to his favorite reading spot by the creek. He found his son sitting on a large flat rock, engineering book open on his lap, but his gaze directed at the trickle of water that was all that remained of what had once been a robust stream. "Hey," James said, sitting beside him. "You doing okay with all this?" Ben shrugged. "I guess. It's weird having strangers watching everything we do." "It is," James agreed. "But they seem respectful, and Rebecca asks good questions." "Did you talk about Mom?" Ben asked directly, his eyes still on the creek. "I did," James admitted. "It felt right, somehow. But you don't have to if you don't want to." Ben was quiet for a long moment before responding. "I don't remember her as well as Lucy does. Sometimes that makes me feel guilty." The confession caught James by surprise. They rarely spoke this openly about Emma, their grief managed through brief acknowledgments rather than deep discussions. "You were only 9 when she died," James said gently. "That's not your fault, Ben. I know, but it's like the memories keep fading, like she's disappearing all over again." Ben's voice cracked slightly on the last words. James put his arm around his son's thin shoulders. "That's why we keep talking about her, why we keep her pictures up, why we tell stories about her. So she stays with us in the ways that matter most." Ben leaned into his father slightly, a rare moment of physical connection for the increasingly independent boy. "Maybe I should talk about her in the interview then, so more people know who she was." "If you want to, I think that would be a beautiful tribute," James said, his throat tight with emotion. "But only if it feels right to you." They sat together in companionable silence for several minutes, watching the meager flow of the creek, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Ben closed his book and stood. "I think Lucy's probably done by now. I should go do my interview while I still feel brave." James nodded, profoundly moved by his son's courage. "I'll walk back with you." As they approached the farmhouse, they saw Lucy emerging onto the porch, wiping tears from her eyes but smiling. She spotted them and waved. "It was good," she called, as they drew closer. "Really good." Ben took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and headed inside without another word. James joined Lucy on the porch, sitting beside her on the steps. "Did you talk about Mom?" he asked quietly. Lucy nodded. "And the farm, and school, and what it's like trying to be a normal teenager while also helping run a farm during a drought." She gave a small laugh. "I didn't realize how much I needed to say all that until I was saying it." James put his arm around her, much as he had with Ben moments earlier. "I'm proud of you, Luce. So proud." "Do you think this will help?" she asked, her voice smaller now, betraying the vulnerability beneath her usual confidence. "The farm, I mean?" James wished he could offer certainty, but honesty had always been their family's policy. "I don't know. But even if it doesn't change our specific situation, maybe it will help people understand what's happening to farms like ours. and maybe that understanding could lead to broader changes that might help others in the future. Lucy nodded thoughtfully. That would be worth it too. They sat together, watching as the news crew moved equipment around the property, capturing additional footage of the farm in the afternoon light. The day had been exhausting emotionally, but there was also a curious sense of relief as if sharing their story had shifted some small portion of the burden they'd been carrying. 2 more days of filming lay ahead, but somehow, the prospect seemed less daunting now. They had begun to tell their truth, and whatever came of it, that felt like an important step. The following days of filming passed in a blur of activity. The news team captured the Harper's daily routines, conducted additional interviews with local agricultural experts and neighboring farmers, and gathered extensive footage of the drought-stricken landscape. Throughout, Rebecca maintained a respectful distance when needed, while also building increasing trust with the family. By Sunday evening, as the crew packed up their equipment for the final time, there was a sense of both accomplishment and uncertainty hanging in the air. The story had been told, or at least captured, but what would come of it remained to be seen. The segment will air 2 weeks from now, Rebecca explained as they gathered on the porch for a final conversation. I'll call you with the exact date and time once it's confirmed. And of course, I'll send you a link to watch it online in case you missed the broadcast. How long will the piece be? James asked, trying to imagine how 3 days of filming would condense into a television segment. About 12 minutes, Rebecca replied, which is actually quite substantial for a national news feature. It will be the centerpiece of that day's program. 12 minutes to capture the complexity of their lives, their struggles, their history. It seemed impossible, and yet James trusted Rebecca's ability to distill the essence of what they'd shared. Thank you, he said, extending his hand. For listening, for caring enough to tell this story. Rebecca shook his hand warmly. Thank you for trusting me with it. Your family's resilience is truly remarkable. As the news vehicles pulled away from the farm, disappearing down the dusty road, the Harpers stood together on the porch, a curious emptiness settling around them after days of constant activity and attention. Well, James said finally, turning to his children. Back to normal tomorrow. Lucy laughed. Whatever normal is for us. Even Ben smiled slightly. At least we got the house clean. That we did, James agreed, ruffling his son's hair affectionately. Come on, let's make dinner and get some rest. We still have a farm to run, TV cameras or no TV cameras. As they moved inside, James found himself wondering what impact, if any, their story would have when it eventually reached viewers across the country. He'd gone into this experience with limited expectations and considerable wariness. Now, however, he felt a cautious hope not just for their farm, but for the broader understanding their story might create about the challenges facing family farmers everywhere. Whether that hope was justified remained to be seen. For now, there was dinner to prepare, plans to make for the coming week's work, and the ever-present challenge of keeping Harper Family Farm alive for another season. The 2 weeks following the filming passed with agonizing slowness for Lucy and surprising speed for James, who buried himself in work both on the farm and at Pete's landscaping business to avoid dwelling on the impending broadcast. Ben, meanwhile, maintained his usual stoic exterior, though James occasionally caught him researching the national morning show online, checking ratings and viewer demographics with his characteristic thoroughness. Rebecca called 3 days before the air date to confirm the details. Thursday morning, 8:15 a.m. Eastern Time, which would be 7:15 a.m. your time, she explained. The segment will also be available on our website and social media platforms immediately afterward. We'll be watching, James assured her, trying to keep the nervousness from his voice. I think you'll be pleased, Rebecca said warmly. The piece came together beautifully. Your family's story is powerful, James. After the call, James informed Lucy and Ben, who immediately began making plans for a viewing event at the farmhouse. We should invite Mrs. Wilson, Lucy insisted. And maybe Pete and his wife. They've all been so supportive. James hesitated. Let's keep it small for now. Just us for the initial viewing. We can always share it with others later. The truth was, he was terrified of being embarrassed of seeing himself on national television and finding he'd come across as pathetic or inarticulate. The vulnerability of the moment was almost overwhelming. When Thursday morning finally arrived, the Harper family gathered in their living room, the ancient television tuned to the national morning show. They sat together on the worn sofa, breakfast untouched on plates balanced on their laps, eyes fixed on the screen as the program's familiar theme music played. The first half hour of the show covered various news items, political developments in Washington, an international summit, updates on a tropical storm threatening the Gulf Coast. Then, following a commercial break, the program returned with the female anchor's solemn introduction. For the past 3 years, much of America's agricultural heartland has been gripped by severe drought conditions, creating unprecedented challenges for the family farms that have been the backbone of rural communities for generations. Today, as part of our ongoing American Resilience series, senior correspondent Rebecca Chen brings us the story of one such family, fighting to preserve a legacy that spans 4 generations. End quote. The screen transitioned to a wide shot of Harper family farm at sunrise, the golden light softening the harsh evidence of drought, making the struggling fields look almost beautiful in their vulnerability. Rebecca's voice narrated over the footage. Harper Family Farm in Riverdale Valley has weathered dust bowls, floods, economic depressions, and market fluctuations since 1923. But fourth-generation farmer James Harper fears the current drought, now in its 3rd consecutive year, may be the challenge that finally breaks a century of resilience. The image shifted to James walking through a field of stunted corn, his hand touching the withered leaves with gentle concern. "We're operating at about 40% capacity," James's voice explained as the camera followed him. "With input costs remaining the same or even increasing, that means we're losing money every day. It's simple math, and the numbers don't add up to survival right now." Lucy gasped softly beside James on the couch, reaching for his hand. "You look so dignified," she whispered. James squeezed her hand but couldn't respond, transfixed by the surreal experience of watching himself on national television. The segment continued, skillfully weaving together the interviews with footage of daily farm operations. Rebecca's narration provided context about the broader agricultural crisis, while the Harper family's specific experience gave it human dimension. When the story shifted to Emma's passing and its impact on the family, James felt his chest tighten. The screen showed the 3 of them standing by the oak tree, looking toward the small family cemetery plot on the hill where Emma was buried. 3 years ago, the Harpers faced another devastating loss. Rebecca's voice explained gently. Emma Harper, wife, mother, and by all accounts, the emotional center of the family, lost her battle with cancer, leaving James to raise their 2 children alone, while also fighting to save the farm she loved. The image cut to James's interview. James watched himself on screen, surprised by the raw emotion visible in his expression as he spoke about Emma. "She was the heart of this place," his recorded self said, the slight tremor in his voice unmistakable. "She made me promise 2 things, to keep the kids connected to the land, and to never give up on the farm unless I'd tried everything possible to save it. I'm still trying to keep both those promises." Then shifted closer to James on the couch, a silent gesture of support that meant more than words could express. The segment transitioned to Lucy's interview, her youthful face serious yet hopeful. "Some kids my age don't understand why this matters so much," she said, her composure impressive for a 16-year-old. "But this isn't just dirt and plants to us. It's our history. It's who we are. And it's not just about us. It's about all the family farms disappearing across the country. Every time one goes under, we lose something important as a nation." Lucy buried her face in her hands, embarrassed yet pleased by her own articulate passion. Then it was Ben's turn. James felt his younger child tense beside him, as the screen showed Ben sitting by the creek, his engineering book visible beside him. "I don't remember my mom as well as I wish I did," Ben said with unexpected openness. "But I know she loved this land. And I know she believed in taking care of the things that matter." He glanced down at his book. "That's why I'm studying engineering. I want to find better ways to help farms like ours adapt to changing conditions, more efficient irrigation, sustainable practices, technology that's accessible to small espaces. Operations, not just corporate ones." Lucy reached across James to squeeze her brother's arm, clearly moved by revelations she hadn't heard during his private interview. The segment continued with interviews from agricultural experts explaining the broader context of climate change, economic pressures on family farms, and the consolidation of agricultural land by corporate entities. Throughout, Rebecca's narration maintained the connection to the Harpers' specific struggle, using their story to illustrate the human cost of these larger trends. As the piece neared its conclusion, the footage returned to James sitting on the porch at sunset, his weathered face thoughtful in the fading light. "What keeps you going?" Rebecca's voice asked from off-camera. "When the odds seem stacked against you?" James watched himself consider the question before answering. "Faith, I suppose," his recorded self replied. "Not just religious faith, though that's part of it. Faith in the land, that it will recover if we treat it right. Faith in the next generation that they'll find ways to adapt that we haven't imagined yet. And faith in people that when they understand what's happening, they'll care enough to help preserve this way of life before it's gone forever." The camera pulled back to a wide shot of the entire farm as Rebecca delivered the closing narration. The future of Harper Family Farm remains uncertain. Like thousands of family operations across America's heartland, it faces challenges that previous generations could never have anticipated: a changing climate, global economic forces, and the steady erosion of rural infrastructure and communities. And what is certain, however, is the determination of the Harper family to fight for their legacy, to honor the promise James made to his late wife, and to find a path forward that preserves not just their own farm, but the values and knowledge it represents. In an age of increasing disconnection from our food sources, their struggle matters to all of us who eat the fruits of American farmland, whether we realize it or not. The segment ended with a return to the studio, where the anchors appeared visibly moved. That was Rebecca Chen's report on the Harper family of Riverdale Valley. The male anchor said solemnly, "A powerful reminder of the challenges facing America's family farms." For viewers interested in learning more about the agricultural crisis in America's heartland, or in supporting organizations working to preserve family farms, the female anchor added, "Please visit our website, where we've compiled resources related to this story." And with that, the program moved on to weather and sports, leaving the Harper family sitting in stunned silence in their living room. "Wow," Lucy finally whispered. "Just wow." Ben nodded, equally speechless. James found himself battling unexpected emotion. The segment had captured something essential about their struggle, their connection to the land, and their determination to persevere. It had dignified their hardship without turning it into a spectacle. Rebecca had kept her promise to tell their story with respect and authenticity. "Do you think anyone will care?" Ben asked finally, giving voice to the question they were all wondering. "I don't know," James admitted. "But I'm glad we did it, regardless. It feels important that people understand what's happening, even if it doesn't change anything for us specifically." Lucy reached for the remote and turned off the television. "So what now?" James stood, gathering their untouched breakfast plates. "Now we get back to work. The corn in the west field needs attention, and I promised Pete I'd help with a landscaping job in Clayton this afternoon." Life would continue as it had before, he knew. The farm's challenges remained. The drought persisted. The bank's deadline loomed. 12 minutes of national attention wouldn't magically solve their problems. And yet, as James headed to the kitchen, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months. A fragile, cautious hope. Their story had been told. Their struggle had been witnessed. Perhaps that was enough to be seen, to be heard, to have their fight for survival acknowledged as something that mattered beyond the boundaries of their land. Whatever came next, they had honored Emma's memory and the legacy of the generations before them by speaking their truth. There was dignity in that, even if the farm itself couldn't be saved. Rebecca Chen sat in her Manhattan apartment, watching the broadcast of the Harper segment on her laptop. Though she had seen the final edit during production, there was something different about viewing it as it aired to millions of Americans simultaneously. The piece had come together even more powerfully than she'd hoped. The Harpers' natural dignity, their articulate passion for their way of life, and the visual impact of the drought-stricken farm created a compelling narrative that she hoped would resonate with viewers. As the segment concluded, Rebecca opened her email and immediately began composing a message to James. She wanted him to know how pleased she was with the final result, to thank him again for trusting her with his family's story, and to let him know she would keep him updated on any significant response to the broadcast. Just as she was about to hit send, her phone rang. Her producer, Sophia. "You're watching?" Sophia asked without preamble when Rebecca answered. "Just finished," Rebecca confirmed. "I think it came together beautifully." "It's more than beautiful," Sophia replied, excitement evident in her voice. "It's resonating. The website is already seeing massive traffic on the Harper story. Social media mentions are exploding. And we've received calls from 3 agricultural policy organizations and 2 charitable foundations asking how they can connect with the family." End quote. Rebecca felt a surge of satisfaction. This was what she'd hoped for, not just viewership, but engagement, the kind that might translate into tangible support. "That's wonderful news," she said. "I'm about to email James to let him know how well the piece turned out. Should I mention the initial response?" "Absolutely," Sophia encouraged. "But maybe suggest they brace themselves. If this keeps building momentum the way it has in just the first 30 minutes, they may be in for quite a ride." After ending the call, Rebecca revised her email to include mention of the initial positive feedback, though she was careful not to create unrealistic expectations. The news cycle moved quickly. Today's compelling story could be forgotten by tomorrow. Better to underpromise and overdeliver. Still, as she sent the message, Rebecca felt unusually invested in this particular story's impact. Perhaps it was the genuine connection she'd formed with the Harper family, or perhaps it was the urgency of the larger issue their struggle represented. Whatever the reason, she found herself hoping that this segment might be one of those rare stories that not only informed and moved viewers, but actually created meaningful change. 3 days after the broadcast, James stood in the post office in Riverdale Valley, keys in hand, staring in disbelief at the notice he'd just received. According to the postmaster, there were too many packages and letters addressed to the Harper family to fit in their regular mailbox, or even to be delivered by the rural route carrier. They would need to come in person to collect the unexpected deluge of correspondence. "Don't just stand there, Dad," Lucy urged excitedly. "Let's see what's in there." James followed the postmaster, Mrs. Grantham, into the back room, where he was confronted with a scene he could never have imagined. Dozens of packages of various sizes stacked on a cart, and several mail bins overflowing with envelopes. "Started coming in yesterday," Mrs. Grantham explained, clearly enjoying the unusual situation. "After that TV show aired, never seen anything like it in 30 years working here. All of this is for us?" James asked incredulously. "Every bit," Mrs. Grantham confirmed. "And this is just what's come through official mail. UPS and FedEx have been making deliveries to your place too, according to my nephew who works for UPS." Lucy was already examining the packages, her eyes wide. "Dad, look at the return addresses there from all over the country." James picked up one of the envelopes, noting the California postmark. "We can't possibly take all this home in one trip." "Don't worry," Mrs. Grantham assured him. "I'll hold whatever you can't fit today. But you might want to borrow a bigger vehicle for the next load." It took 3 trips with James's pickup truck to transport everything back to the farm. By early afternoon, the kitchen table and most of the living room floor were covered with opened and unopened mail. "We should wait for Ben to get home before we open any more," Lucy suggested, though her fingers itched to tear into the colorful packages. James nodded, still overwhelmed by the volume of the response. His phone had been equally active, with dozens of voicemails from people who had somehow obtained their home number, plus countless notifications of new emails that he hadn't had time to check. Rebecca had called as well, warning him that the segment had generated an unusually strong viewer response and offering guidance on how to manage the sudden attention. She'd promised to help filter the most significant contacts, legitimate offers of assistance, media requests for follow-up interviews, and potential business opportunities from the general expressions of support and goodwill. When Ben arrived home from his summer math program, he stopped in the doorway, eyes widening at the sight of the mallet-covered living room. "Whoa," was all he managed. "Come on," Lucy encouraged, patting the small space she'd cleared on the couch. "Let's see what people sent." The next hour was spent opening packages and letters, reading messages of support, and sharing incredulous looks as they discovered the contents. There were handwritten letters from farmers across the country, sharing their own struggles and offering solidarity. There were children's drawings of the farm, inspired by the footage they'd seen. There were small care packages containing homemade preserves, farm-related books, and other thoughtful gifts. More surprising were the checks and money orders, ranging from $5 to several thousand, often accompanied by notes explaining personal connections to farming or rural life that had moved the senders to contribute Saya. "This one's from a retired farmer in Nebraska," James read aloud from one letter. "Use the money from selling my own farm to invest. These dividends should go to someone still fighting the good fight." He held up a check for $5,000, his hand trembling slightly. "And here's one from a fourth-grade class in Michigan," Lucy added, showing them a colorful card signed by 28 children. They had a bake sale and raised $237.42 to help save the Harper farm. Ben, meanwhile, was methodically sorting the correspondence into categories: general well-wishers, financial contributions, business propositions, and a separate pile for anything that seemed particularly significant or unusual. "Dad," he said suddenly, holding up an official-looking letter. "This one's from State University's Agricultural Engineering Department. They're offering me a place in their summer internship program for high school students with interest in sustainable farming technology." James took the letter, reading it carefully. It was indeed a formal invitation, mentioning that they had been impressed by Ben's evident interest in engineering solutions for agricultural challenges, as expressed in the National Morning Show segment. "That's amazing, Ben!" Lucy exclaimed. "Are you going to accept?" Ben looked to his father, uncharacteristic excitement breaking through his usual reserve. "Could I?" "Of course," James replied without hesitation. "It's an incredible opportunity." As they continued opening mail, patterns emerged in the responses. Many were simple expressions of support and appreciation for the family's dedication to their land. Some offered practical assistance, a seed company sending drought-resistant varieties to test, an irrigation specialist offering a free consultation, a soil conservation expert volunteering his services. Perhaps most surprising were the business inquiries. A high-end restaurant chain in Chicago expressed interest in forming a direct purchasing relationship for whatever crops the Harpers could supply, citing growing customer demand for produce with a story behind it. A sustainable agriculture investment fund proposed discussing modernization funding that would allow the farm to adapt to changing climate conditions while maintaining family ownership. By evening, they had opened perhaps a third of the correspondence, and James felt simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. The response was more than he could have imagined, not just in volume, but in the genuine connection people seemed to feel to their story. "What do we do with all this?" Lucy asked as they sat around the kitchen table, picking at a hastily prepared dinner, small mountains of opened mail surrounding them. "I'm not sure yet," James admitted. "We need to process it all, respond properly to people's kindness, figure out which opportunities might actually help secure the farm's future and which are just well-intentioned but impractical. We should make a database," Ben suggested with his typical practical focus. "Track who sent what, categorize the types of offers, prioritize responses." James smiled at his son's methodical approach. "That sounds like a good start. And we should definitely call Rebecca," Lucy added. "She'll know how to handle some of the media requests especially." James nodded in agreement. The day's revelations had left him feeling both gratefully overwhelmed and wary of missteps. This was uncharted territory for a family used to handling their problems privately. "One thing I know for certain," he said after a thoughtful pause. "We need to be careful about accepting financial help. I don't want charity that comes with strings attached or that compromises what this farm stands for." "But we do need help, Dad," Lucy reminded him. Gently. "The bank deadline hasn't changed." "I know," James acknowledged. "And I'm not saying we should refuse everything, just that we need to be thoughtful about what we accept and how we use it. This farm isn't just ours. It belongs to everyone who's ever worked this land, including your mom. We have a responsibility to honor that legacy." End quote. Ben, who had been quietly considering while his father and sister talked, spoke up. "What if we used some of the money to implement sustainable improvements? Things that would help the farm weather future droughts better? It wouldn't just be taking handouts. It would be investing in making this place viable for the long term." James studied his son with pride. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need." As the evening wound down, the initial excitement giving way to thoughtful planning, James stepped outside onto the porch for a moment of quiet reflection. The night was clear, stars visible above, in numbers rarely seen by city dwellers. The same stars that had watched over 4 generations of Harpers working this land. He thought about Emma, wondering what she would make of the day's events. She had always believed in the essential goodness of people, in the power of community to weather hard times together. Perhaps this outpouring of support would have seemed like a confirmation of that faith to her. The farm's future was still far from secure. One broadcast and a few days of public attention couldn't solve the fundamental challenges they faced: the changing climate, the economic pressures, the ongoing drought. But something had shifted. Possibilities had opened, where before there had been only looming foreclosure. Connections had formed with people who understood the value of what they were fighting to preserve. James gazed out at the darkened fields, the land that had sustained his family for generations. For the first time in months, perhaps years, he allowed himself to truly believe that Harper Family Farm might survive to see a 5th generation different, perhaps adapted to new realities, but still rooted in the values and connection to the land that had defined it from the beginning. A simple act of kindness, offering water to a thirsty stranger, had somehow set in motion events he could never have anticipated. There was a lesson in that, James thought. Even in the most desperate circumstances, generosity created ripples that could return in unexpected ways. He would do his best to be worthy of the support they'd received, to use it not just to save their farm, but to help create a model that might benefit other struggling family operations. The path forward was still uncertain, but for tonight at least, it was enough to know they wouldn't be walking it alone. 1 year later, the morning sun cast long shadows across Harper Family Farm as James stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand, to survey the day ahead. The landscape that greeted him was markedly different from a year before: fields green with carefully selected drought-resistant crops, a new high-efficiency irrigation system glinting in the early light, solar panels on the barn roof generating power for the farm's operations. The severe drought had finally broken in late autumn, not with the dramatic deluge they'd hoped for, but with a series of moderate rainfall events that had gradually begun to replenish the depleted groundwater. Nature was healing, albeit slowly, and the farm was healing with it. James took an appreciative sip of his coffee, reflecting on the whirlwind year that had followed their unexpected moment in the national spotlight. The response to the broadcast had been even more substantial than those first days of mail had suggested. By the time they had processed all the correspondence, financial contributions had totaled nearly $380,000, an astonishing sum that had not only allowed them to clear their debt with the bank, but also to make strategic investments in the farm's future sustainability. More valuable than the money, however, had been the connections formed. Agricultural experts from across the country had offered consultations, helping the Harpers develop a comprehensive plan to adapt their operation to changing climate conditions. A network of family farm advocates had provided legal and business guidance, ensuring that the Harper Farm's new foundation was built on solid ground. The direct purchasing relationship with the Chicago restaurant chain had blossomed into a stable contract that now accounted for nearly 40% of their produce sales, at premium prices that reflected the science, quality, and story behind their crops. 3 neighboring farms had joined the arrangement, creating a small but robust local cooperative that increased their collective bargaining power and decreased individual risk. Ben's summer internship at State University had proved transformative. He'd returned with not only practical knowledge about emerging agricultural technologies, but also a clear vision for his future: a dual degree in agricultural science and engineering that would allow him to help farms like theirs adapt to changing conditions. The university had already expressed interest in offering him a substantial scholarship when he graduated high school the following year. Lucy had discovered her own passion in the aftermath of the broadcast. Fielding media inquiries and managing the farm's new social media presence had revealed a talent for communications that she was now channeling into plans to study agricultural journalism and advocacy. She'd even started a popular blog documenting the farm's transformation, connecting with young people across the country interested in the future of sustainable farming. The creaking of the screen door behind him announced Lucy's arrival on the porch. "Morning, Dad," she greeted, her own coffee mug in hand. Rebecca called. She's still planning to arrive around noon. Rebecca Chen had maintained contact throughout the year, her initial professional interest in their story evolving into a genuine friendship. She'd returned to the farm several times for follow-up pieces, documenting the changes and continuing to bring attention to the broader issues facing family farms. Today's visit was more personal, a one-year anniversary gathering to celebrate the farm's remarkable turnaround. "Everything ready for the party?" James asked. Lucy nodded. "Tables are set up in the oak's shade. Food's prepped. Ben's putting the final touches on his demonstration area." She rolled her eyes good-naturedly at her brother's insistence on showcasing the technical improvements to their irrigation system. James smiled. For all his technological focus, Ben remained his mother's son in his enthusiasm for sharing knowledge. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Lucy mused, leaning against the porch railing. "Sometimes it feels like that broadcast happened yesterday. Other times, it feels like a decade ago." "I know what you mean," James agreed. "We're different people now in some ways, but the same in the ways that matter," Lucy added thoughtfully. They fell into companionable silence, watching as the farm awakened fully to the new day. In the distance, Ben could be seen making adjustments to the automated irrigation controls he'd helped design during his internship. The soft humming of a tractor announced the arrival of Pete Lawson, who had transitioned from occasional employer to business partner in their expanded operation. James thought about Emma, as he did every morning. She would have been proud of how they'd weathered the crisis, of how the children had grown not just in age, but in purpose and confidence. He liked to think she would have approved of the changes they'd made, adaptations that honored tradition while embracing necessary innovation. The farm that had nearly slipped away now stood as a model of resilience and adaptation. It wasn't perfect, challenges remained, and the changing climate would continue to demand new responses, but it was viable, sustainable, a living legacy that could now realistically be passed to a fifth generation, whether through Lucy, Ben, or both. "Dad," Lucy said, interrupting his reflections, "you never told me what made you decide to offer water to Rebecca that day. You didn't know who she was. You were conserving every drop because of the drought. Why stop for a stranger?" James considered the question, its significance extending far beyond the simple act it referenced. "It was the right thing to do," he answered finally. "Someone was struggling, and I had something that could help. The rest is just what followed." Lucy seemed to understand that this simple philosophy encompassed much more than that single interaction that spoke to the heart of who they were as a family, as stewards of the land, as members of a broader community that extended far beyond the boundaries of their property. "I'm going to check on Ben," she said, setting down her mug. "Make sure he's not planning to soak our guests with his demonstration." As Lucy headed toward the fields, James remained on the porch a moment longer. The farm spread out before him, transformed yet familiar, bearing the imprints of 4 generations of Harpers, and now evolving to meet the needs of those to come. A year ago, he had offered cold water to a thirsty stranger under the beating sun, unaware she was a national news correspondent in disguise. It had been a simple act of kindness, expected no return, seeking no recognition. Yet it had set in motion a chain of events that had not only saved their farm, but had enriched their lives in ways he could never have imagined. There was wisdom in that, James thought, a reminder that even in the most challenging circumstances, generosity created possibilities that calculation and caution could not. The future would bring new challenges, certainly, but they would face them as they had faced all others. With determination, adaptability, and the willingness to extend a helping hand when needed, knowing that such gestures had power beyond their immediate impact. With that thought in mind, James Harper stepped off the porch and walked toward his fields, ready to embrace whatever the new day might bring. As the day's celebration unfolded beneath the ancient oak, Rebecca Chen stood slightly apart from the gathering, capturing candid photographs with her professional camera. The scene before her embodied everything she had hoped might result from that first encounter a year ago. A struggling farm revitalized, a family reinforced in their purpose, a community strengthened by shared investment in its future. The guests included neighbors who had formed the new cooperative, agricultural experts who had provided guidance, local officials who had been inspired to develop better support systems for family farms in the region, and even a few viewers whose lives had been changed by the Harper's story. Children played in the grass, while adults engaged in conversations that flowed easily between farming techniques, community development, and personal connections. At the center of it all were the Harper's James, discussing new crop rotations with a soil conservation expert, Lucy documenting the event for her increasingly influential blog, then earnestly explaining their water reclamation system to an attentive group of local farmers. Rebecca captured image after image, knowing that this gathering represented something important, not just a happy ending to one family's crisis, but a template for rural resilience in changing times. James noticed her standing apart and approached, 2 glasses of lemonade in hand. He offered one to her with a smile that held none of the wariness that had characterized their early interactions. "Documenting for posterity?" he asked, nodding toward her camera. "Something like that," Rebecca admitted. "Though I'm not entirely sure where these particular photos will end up. They feel more personal somehow." James nodded understanding. "You're part of this story too, you know. None of this would have happened if you hadn't stopped to run by our farm that day. And none of it would have happened if you hadn't offered water to a stranger," Rebecca countered. "I've thought about that a lot over the past year, how the biggest stories often begin with the smallest gestures." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the gathering. "We're planning a follow-up series," Rebecca said finally. "Not just on your farm, but on the broader movement your story helped catalyze. Family farms collaborating with technology experts, restaurants creating direct purchasing relationships with small producers, communities investing in local agricultural infrastructure. It's happening across the country in small but significant ways." "And that's good to hear," James replied. "Sometimes when you're focused on your own fields, it's hard to see the bigger picture. That's what journalism at its best should do, connect the individual story to the larger context," Rebecca said. "Your family showed that adapting doesn't have to mean abandoning tradition, that innovation and heritage can strengthen rather than oppose each other. That's a message people needed to hear." James smiled slightly. "We were just trying to survive. Sometimes that's enough," Rebecca observed. "Sometimes just showing what it takes to persevere creates ripples that extend far beyond what you could imagine." From across the gathering, Lucy called for their attention, announcing that it was time for Ben's irrigation demonstration. As they moved to join the others, Rebecca reflected on her own journey since that hot day when she jogged past Harper Family Farm. The American Resilience series had gone on to win several journalism awards, but more importantly, it had evolved into an ongoing project that highlighted solutions rather than just problems, possibilities, rather than just challenges. Her own career had been enriched not just professionally, but personally, by the connections formed with the people whose stories she told. As Ben began his enthusiastic explanation of how they had reduced water usage by nearly 40% while increasing crop yields, Rebecca raised her camera once more, focusing on the faces of those listening, engaged, hopeful, invested in a future that honored the past while adapting to new realities. This, she thought, was why she had become a journalist, not just to document what was broken in the world, but to illuminate paths toward repair, to connect people across divides of geography and experience, to tell stories that reminded us of our shared humanity and capacity for positive change. A simple act of kindness, a farmer offering water to a thirsty jogger, had generated ripples that continued to expand in ways neither of them could have predicted. In that ordinary moment of human connection lay an extraordinary reminder. Even in times of scarcity, generosity created abundance that calculations of self-interest could never produce. Rebecca lowered her camera and simply watched, allowing herself to be fully present in a moment that embodied everything she believed about the power of storytelling to change lives, including, perhaps especially, her own.